Hello, quiet rioters. It's me, Naomi, back with another Poll the Other One. I missed you all this weekend on Sunday school, but Zoe Williams was an excellent stand-in once again. So if you've not gone and hoovered that show up, please make sure you have a listen. I was particularly struck by what she was saying about the right of Labour not necessarily being true friends of Keir Starmer, but there was lots in there that you'll find interesting. And the reason I wasn't on the show is because I went to my old home of Northern Ireland for an amazing wedding. And it got me thinking that it really was high time we took another look at what's happening on the other side of the Irish Sea, because there is quite a lot going on. A general election is going to happen at some point in the south of Ireland, but plenty happening with Sinn Féin, which of course is an all-Ireland party, the largest party in Stormont, the second largest party in the Dáil, and they've been rocked by a series of scandals in recent months. And I think if a similar level of scandal was taking place in any British party, you can bet that every political podcast would be all over it. If you don't know what I'm talking about, keep listening. If you do know what I'm talking about, please also keep listening and then message Quiet Riot HQ with your views. I am no expert, but I know a woman who is. So I am delighted to be joined once again by Northern Irish journalist and commentator Amanda Ferguson. Welcome back to Quiet Riot, Amanda.
Thank you for having me.
You hosted a conference at Queen's University Belfast last week. How did that go?
It went really well. It was the Women in Media 2024 Partnership Summit. So we were pulling at the three strands of the Good Friday Agreement. So we had input from within Northern Ireland, from across the border in the Republic of Ireland, and also from Britain. So it was great to have women on air from Dublin and women in journalism Scotland and reporters from London. And we had the press ombudsperson for Ireland, Susan McKay, and a whole pile of students as well, which was lovely. So it was a mixture of established career journalists and also students. And it was just a lovely atmosphere, and I am frazzled after all of the organisation that's gone into it. So this is like therapy, I guess.
Well, listeners, Amanda's frazzled from a conference. I'm frazzled from a wedding, but we're still going to get into the detail of everything. But that does sound like a fantastic conference, and well done. Let's turn back to Sinn Féin. The matters facing them are pretty serious, and Sinn Féin doesn't dispute that. But as is so often the case, whether it is a corporate scandal, a celebrity scandal, a scandal that rocks an institution like the BBC, it's often the level of transparency around what happened, who knew what, when they knew it, what action they did or didn't take that actually causes the major dispute. Amanda, for listeners who may well be unforgivably so because of the lack of coverage we get over here about all things happening in Northern Ireland and Ireland, can you give us a bit of a potted history of the, I think, is it 4 or 5, I don't know, separate scandals that have rocked Sinn Féin's credibility in recent times? Maybe we could start with Chair of the Public Accounts Committee, Brian Stanley. He's resigned, the Sinn Féin whip, I believe.
Obviously, for listeners who aren't overly familiar with Sinn Féin or only have a little bit of, I'll do a sort of a basics guide. So
Please.
Sinn Féin,
Please do, yeah.
Sinn Féin is the only major political party that has an electoral presence on both sides of the border in Ireland. So Michelle O'Neill is the vice president of the party. She's the first minister within Northern Ireland. Then in the Republic of Ireland, Mary Lou McDonald is the president of Sinn Féin. And in recent years, it looked as if Sinn Féin was poised to enter government for the first time in the Republic of Ireland. But their polling has just taken a dive, and the general election that's due to take place in the Republic of Ireland, it's due to take place at the very latest March the 22nd, but it was announced in recent times that it's likely to take place at some point in November. So the 22nd of November or the 29th of November seem likely date for that. And Sinn Féin has been dealing with a range of crises and controversies on both sides of the border over the last number of weeks. So you had mentioned there Brian Stanley. That is certainly one of them, and we'll not go into all of the detail because there are some legal restrictions around that, but he is no longer part of Sinn Féin. There have been various news stories worries about kangaroo courts and about hotel rooms and about allegations around him and around another Sinn Féin person that we just can't go into the detail of it now.
Sure.
But it's been a headache for the party. Police may not be involved, and there's been internal inquiries and so on. A lot of media and political focus.
And he's called the internal process a kangaroo court, I think.
Yeah.
And that's why he resigned the whip rather than was sort of pushed out.
There's a lot of questions that still remain around that particular issue. And then also we had the Sinn Féin TD, Patricia Ryan, has resigned from the party, amid some sort of concerns around internal processes around Facebook posts and so on. But that's kind of been the least of their worries. There was the issue around the press officers within Northern Ireland or the north of Ireland. Michael McMonigal, Sinn Féin's former press officer, is due to be sentenced next month in relation to some child sex offences. And there's been a big scandal with regard to the timeline around two press officers who have since quit the party, providing references for him to move on to his next job after he left Sinn Féin. So lots of questions about what happened when and who knew what and when, so on, taking place. Then we have had the former Senator Niall O'Donnell, who was previously the mayor in Belfast. He was a senator down in the Shannon in Dublin, and he quit the party. And then it emerged that he was experiencing mental health issues, and it also emerged that there had been an investigation regarding inappropriate but not sexual text messages shared with a Sinn Féin member who was 16. There was an issue around the fact that it was reported that the young person was 17, and then that was the Dáil record and the Stormont record were changed to reflect that young person was 16, and various accusations in the media with regard to that. And then there has also been a portrait issue at Belfast City Hall where a former Sinn Féin staffer had to quit the party after an incident involving the portrait of a former unionist mayor of Belfast was damaged, and that was referred to the police as well. So it's been just weeks of questions around transparency and questions around accountability and who knew what and when, and this has all come in for Sinn Féin as they are facing into a general election on the other side of the border. So the timing couldn't be worse from that perspective. And Sinn Féin has kind of gone from being poised to enter government and doing better than expected in 2020 at the general election. The suggestion they didn't run enough candidates to capitalise on that, and the idea that Mary Lou McDonald would be the first female Taoiseach of Ireland, whereas now there's been a slide in the polls.
Well, I know. I was just having a quick look at those because in May, Sinn Féin was leading Fine Gael by 6 points, Fianna Fáil by 10, and they've now dropped below both. Given the voting system that they have to elect the Dáil, I mean, do you get a feel for what the most likely outcome of the election could be in November?
I'm not calling anything these days, but I do know that if you look at the recent polling, it showed that Fine Gael was on 24%, the Independents were on 22%, that Fianna Fáil was on 19%, that Sinn Féin was on 16%, and I'll not read out the smaller parties there. But it was also reported as well that the main political parties in the Republic of Ireland have collectively increased their support by 23% since May, with Sinn Féin falling by 41% in the same period, and that while Sinn Féin is reported to still be the most popular party in the 18 to 35 age group, I suppose it remains to be seen if the boost in support as it's described for independents will translate into votes and how they're going to fare. I think if Sinn Féin was to hold on to the number of seats that it has, it will be happy with that. But it's just a fascinating look, that a variety. It's not just the recent scandals that have fallen into this. There's been issues around migration and there's been issues around policy and so on. But as we know, there hasn't been one vote cast just yet. So I guess we'll have to wait and see what the electorate decide.
Oh, November, bringing us stressful elections on both sides of the Atlantic. We know now, as you mentioned, that the general election in Ireland will take place before the end of the year, although no date has totally been settled on. What do you think drove Fine Gael Taoiseach Simon Harris to call the election for this side of the deadline, before the end of this year? Do you think, in part, he wants to strike while Sinn Féin is both distracted because of all of these internal investigations and potentially legal disputes that are happening, and also is now perhaps in the eyes of voters a bit more disgraced?
I think it's probably part of it. The reasons for Sinn Féin's sort of downfall in recent times are sort of a mixture of self-harm issues within the party itself, but also the targeting by political opponents and so on. Whenever Simon Harris took over as Taoiseach, it was very clear that he kept saying that the election was going to go, until full term, that it would be March of next year that it would happen. But that has since been revised, and we've heard from the Green Party in the South saying that 29th would be the preference for them. We know that there were some budget issues that the government parties in the Republic of Ireland wanted to get out of the way before an election was called. But it's been a remarkable sequence of events, and that's why I'm not getting into the prediction games, because coming out of the 2020 election, Sinn Féin did much better than they've been anticipated to do, and that whole idea of Mary Lou McDonald being a Taoiseach in waiting was being discussed very casually, but fortunes have changed very quickly, so we'll have to see what happens next.
Well, a week really is a long time in politics these days. I'm really interested in the dynamic between Mary Lou McDonald and Michelle O'Neill. And so I kind of wanted to pick your brains about how you see that relationship. Because remember, in many GB political parties, there is sometimes a legal separate entity. So, for example, the Green Party is the Green Party of England and Wales, and there is a different party, the Scottish Greens. Sinn Féin is an all-Ireland party. But I often see, and look, this is an outsider's view, okay, but when maybe Michelle O'Neill has a successful moment, it's Mary Lou McDonald who's often front and centre, taking quite a lot of credit for the success of the party in Northern Ireland. Is that right? Do you think it might be that Michelle O'Neill would maybe prefer to be running her own party independently of Sinn Féin in the South?
It's not quite that. Sinn Féin is a 32 county party. Obviously, the People Before Profit is a smaller party. It's also a 32 county party. And the Greens as well have their link-ups and their relationships, throughout Ireland and Britain and Europe as well. But Sinn Féin's the only major political party on both sides of the border. Now, Mary Lou McDonald, the buck stops with her. It's her party. She leads it. She's the president. Michelle O'Neill is vice president, and she is the first minister up at Stormont. So whenever there's credit, they do share it amongst themselves. But I suppose it's just the reality of partition, or the reality of the creation of Northern Ireland, that while it is a 32 county party, the emphasis on both sides of the border is different, because it takes into account the jurisdictional reality of both sides of the border, and also the media on both sides of the border as well. So, while a lot of the recent scandals were focusing on the north for Sinn Féin, there wasn't as much interest in the Republic of Ireland as to what was happening. But then it really did become an all-Ireland story. If you were to ask Michelle O'Neill, she will say that Mary Lou McDonald is the leader of the party. So I guess it depends how you view the politics of it. And it is a unique position that the party is in, because of the fact that it stands for election on both sides of the border. Because, for example, while the Irish government, which is really always been sort of Fine Gael or Fianna Fáil or some form of coalition, they've always held the role of Taoiseach within the Republic of Ireland. Sinn Féin has never had that. But in the north, the parties of government from the Republic of Ireland are the Irish government. They're the co-guarantors of the Good Friday Agreement. So alongside the UK government, they have that role. So I think people, whenever we were reflecting on the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement, people were talking a lot about how the political landscape across Ireland is changing. And there is the practical reality of the fact that Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael don't have an electoral presence on this side of the border. Sinn Féin's main reason for being is the reunification of Ireland. Now, that doesn't mean that they're the only Republicans, they're the only ones that want a united Ireland, or a new Ireland, whatever way you want to describe it. But it is a complicating factor, whenever we're talking about all this.
Absolutely. I mean, when is Northern Irish politics ever simple, Amanda? The answer is never. How is Sinn Féin doing in Northern Ireland in terms of polling? And, has two of the 5 scandals that you mentioned that really focus on the party in the north there, the one about press officer Michael McGonigal, aka Reference Gate, who gave him a reference? Did they know that he had these allegations against him, etc., etc.? And then the portrait of former DUP Lord Mayor Belfast Wallace being damaged and now having to come down. Are we yet seeing any kind of drop in support for Sinn Féin in Northern Ireland? because of that, or before that, or are they still going strong?
Polling isn't as advanced in Northern Ireland as it is in the Republic of Ireland, so we don't have as frequent a flow of information about party support for Sinn Féin within the north as we do on the other side of the border. Now, we have only had Stormont government back up and running this year after a variety of different impasses and ups and downs. And I think that whenever you were looking at the different sort of crises that were engulfing Sinn Féin, one of the first questions on this side of the border was, is this going to destabilise Stormont? Because obviously the DUP and Sinn Féin are at the top of government within Northern Ireland. It's a mandatory power sharing coalition government. We've had various collapses before, and that was whenever there wasn't a lot of outside interest about what was happening until people started saying, does this have implications for the political future of Michelle O'Neill or for Mary Lou McDonald and so on? And I don't think that it does at this point, certainly not for Michelle O'Neill at this point. There's no appetite for destabilising a government given the mess that we're in, really.
And it's not as if the DUP has been without scandal in recent months either.
That's the thing. We know that the DUP has been, it's almost sort of good cop, bad cop, but on one hand you have the Deputy First Minister who has to do the photo shoots and the announcements alongside Michelle O'Neill, but then you also have the sort of attacks within the chambers and so on. So it's a complicated one, but the fact that Northern Ireland has been in such a mess in recent times, and I just don't think the public would forgive politicians if they were to collapse government, in the north. And also it's a sign of perhaps political immaturity that every time there's a crisis that we have to have a collapse of government and then nothing ends up getting done. So I don't think we're in that sphere yet of it being any threat to government. I think probably the biggest concern for Sinn Féin is how it does in this upcoming election in the Republic of Ireland and what it might mean for Mary Lou McDonald's future, because even though all of the reps come out and say, Mary Lou's leadership isn't under question and so on, that may be a different story depending on what the election results are, on the other side of the border. But at this point, I think that it's going to be a very interesting election. It's not the election that we perhaps thought was going to take place. I think the bookies may have made a good bit of money on what's been happening. And then we'll see what the lay of the land is once all the votes are in and counted. But for now, Sinn Féin remains the only 32 county party with that major electoral presence on both sides of the border. Its position in Northern Ireland, we don't know how that it could be affected electorally because we're not due. We've had all of our elections on this side of the border out of the way, and we're due a period of political stability if we're allowed to have it, I guess.
Well, I very much hope you do. One other thing I'd really like to pick your brains on, we touched on this a little bit the last time you came on Quiet Riot. It often seemed that Ireland, north and south, was kind of unlike many other European / Western democracies because it didn't appear to have an organised far right. We've seen violent racist riots across England, very little in other parts of GB, but we did see some in Ireland. Is there a sense that the kind of the pro-immigration positioning of some of the political parties means that those that are against that and who are sort of sympathetic to the far right are now beginning to kind of flex their muscle in a way we hadn't previously seen?
I think it's always been there to an extent in both jurisdictions on the island. However, it's been front and centre in recent times. We know that there's always been sort of some far right elements and sympathy for fascist elements within Northern Ireland. However, it hasn't had that presence on the ground. Anytime fascists and racists tried to organise, they were kind of laughed off the street and maybe only found sympathy among some paramilitary pals. On the other side of the border, immigration has been an issue, and there's been various sort of back and forward and use of that particular issue among the political parties in the Republic of Ireland, maybe in some unsavoury ways as well. I know that the anti-racist and anti-fascist groups have been monitoring this for the longest time, and they are concerned about what's happening. And we saw actually some of the sort of far-right groupings who organised in the Republic of Ireland actually come up to Belfast to participate in those demos, which turned into street disorder after after the Southport murders. It was an interesting time that whenever we were sitting here in Northern Ireland looking over to what was happening in Britain and looking at the rioting, there was about a period of a week before it started to happen in Belfast and beyond. And I don't think we've fully got to grips with all of the reasons that took place, but it was certainly surreal for me to be standing at a protest in Belfast to see a Union flag flying alongside an Irish tricolour in a message that was united around hate and so on. And I think that some of those protests have been described as anti-immigration, and that's a very generous description for what I saw. Like, obviously there will be people there who are victims of misinformation and disinformation. There will be people there who are racist and fascist and so on, and quite a lot of angry people as well. But I think whenever you try to speak to some of the more reasonable people on those sides of the protest, it's very clear that they are blaming people for their problems that aren't responsible for them. It's that sort of classic case of people are looking down instead of looking up at who's causing their problems.
Well, isn't that the truth all over? And we saw here in London, and mercifully I was in Belfast where there were no riots this weekend, but we saw the fascists organising on the streets of London just this weekend. Another topic which always is in my mind because of my day job is Brexit and the relationship reset with the EU that we hear an awful lot about in terms of messaging on this side of the Irish Sea, but we rarely get much detail because they're still kind of figuring all of that out. To what extent does having left the European Union, well, obviously Northern Ireland's now got the Windsor framework safeguarding some of that, and Northern Ireland still sort of is within the single market for goods. But to what extent does that pretty English vote to leave the EU, and I have to say not all England, because otherwise our wonderful listeners will write in and remind me that a lot of us voted to remain, but to what extent is Brexit still a dominant issue within political discourse in Northern Ireland?
It doesn't dominate in the way that it used to. There's certainly that cohort within unionism who feel that they didn't get the Brexit that the rest of the UK got, that are unhappy with what they view as the annexing of Northern Ireland from the rest of the United Kingdom. There's a lot of weariness and tiredness from the majority of people, I guess, who voted to remain, but obviously had to respect it was a UK-wide vote and that leave was carried and so on. It's certainly not in the headlines in the way that it has been over the last couple of years. However, the acceleration of the Irish unity conversations and the future constitutional position of Northern Ireland definitely accelerated after the Brexit vote, because it made people think about where their future lies and their Europeanness and so on and the rest. And those conversations haven't stopped. Now, there's no suggestion that it's around the corner tomorrow, but you can see a sort of formalising of interest groups and lobby groups and so on. And you're starting to see a little bit some of the unionist groupings within Northern Ireland organise and realise that they have to try to sell the benefits of the UK, if they can try to do that. So, it's again part of that bigger conversation about how the political landscape across Ireland's changing, how the demographics of this part of the world are changing and so on. But it's not something that's on the phone-ins or in column inches the way it used to be.
I was keen to kind of know were elements of unionism in Northern Ireland getting concerned about what they were hearing from Keir Starmer, David Lammy, Hilary Benn, others about a closer relationship. And I was just kind of wondering whether that was sort of something that they were likely to pipe up about, or do they kind of still maybe feel a bit embarrassed by it? It wasn't exactly the best strategic political move for them to back leaving the EU in the first place.
I think after all of the turmoil that Brexit caused, and particularly for Northern Ireland, that people viewed a new government in London as this chance for the reset. So the reset in the relationship with the parties within Northern Ireland, reset with the London government's relationship with Dublin, which was awful in recent years, and then also the reset between London and the EU. whenever there was a lot of hope and, a lot of sort of give everybody a chance on the Labour side with regard to the new Prime Minister, with regard to the new Secretary of State. However, what we are seeing is concerns emerging in how the Labour government is treating issues like legacy and human rights within Northern Ireland around, the protection of the Good Friday Agreement, which Labour has continued to say is it's, among its priorities. However, there are people starting to not quite believe that to be the case, and they're slightly concerned that Labour isn't going to protect Northern Ireland's interests in the way that they had perhaps hoped might change from changing from a Tory-led government to a Labour-led government. So I think that's something to watch out for. The recent legacy legislation, the impact on human rights is something that's starting to really cause concern among the legal world, the human rights groups, and all the rest of it. But there does remain that dissatisfaction in unionism with how Brexit panned out, and overall that it's been a headache for this part of the UK and this part of Ireland more so than anywhere else.
Well, I've given a brief mention there to the DUP, but there are, of course, many other parties in Northern Ireland. Give us a bit of an update on everything else, non-Sinn Féin related, that's going on.
There's a bit of an issue around media access, which it would be remiss of me not to mention it because I bang on about it all the time at NUJ meetings and online as well, in that there's certainly significant elements of the media within Northern Ireland who are concerned that they're not getting to scrutinise the decisions that government are taking in a reasonable way. Real concerns around that. We are getting to the sort of policy side of stuff with regard to what's coming out of Stormont, but we're hearing announcements about the Ending Violence Against Women and Girls strategy, which is hugely important. The co-design group spent such effort and such time on that, and obviously Northern Ireland has a particular issue with femicide and real concerns around that. However, whenever the announcement came with regard to the strategy, I think it came with like a £3 million announcement, which is really a drop in the ocean. And anytime you are hosting discussions or panels or at events, I'm hearing the same thing from people, no matter what sector they're from, that they don't have the resources to adequately deliver what they need to deliver for people that are living here. So again, all of those conversations feed into whether it's a health service or that strategy or the race strategy in light of all the recent riots. People are starting to question, if we can't even provide a basic level of service, what are we doing here?
And what do you mean by media access? So what are you not getting that you really ought to be getting if you're to do your job in a democratic society of holding power to account?
We're not getting fair and equal access to the senior politicians that are either elected in this part of the world or visit in this part of the world. So there seems to be a lot of control around who gets to speak and when. And there just isn't that professionalised nature of communications. And I don't blame the communications professionals who are working as part of the government. I actually blame the political parties for this, because they seem to run to an extent from, not all, but a lot of them seem to run from basic levels of scrutiny. So whenever I hear about the media arrangements for lobby in London or in Dublin, it's what we get within Northern Ireland is very far away from what it should be. And I think that is a problem.
Well, you're welcome on here anytime, Amanda. I am not in government, but you are welcome to join in and participate in any quiet riot that you would like to. And I'm sorry that journalists aren't getting quite the access that they need, and well done for lobbying on it. That is all that we've got time for today. So thank you ever so much for joining me again and helping to fill in a lot of the blanks I had in my own head about everything going on over the Irish Sea.
You're very welcome, and thank you for having me. I know that each one of our discussion points could have been a podcast in itself, but as ever, time beats us.
Indeed, and what we'll do is drop a link in the show notes to some of the detail around the stuff we touched on. So listeners, you can read about it if you want to know even more about everything that we've chatted through today. Quiet Rioters, thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to like and subscribe and leave a review and follow us on Blue Sky. And if you can, support us on ko-fi.com/Quiet Riot Pod. We love you all very, very much, and we'll be back again soon. Quiet Riot is an audio production by Cooler Heads with Naomi Smith, Andreou and Kenny Campbell. Music by Mariana Sangita. Artwork by Simona Canelu. Quiet Riot is a co-production with Sandstone Global.